Regina Caeli, Regina Caeli, Regina Caeli,
If I sound right to you, then it's going well. It looks, I mean, I was terrified I had a feedback loop, but I guess I don't. Okay, phew, I panicked over nothing, but that's my middle name. Okay. When in danger, when in doubt, run in circles, scream and shout is my motto. Okay, great. Well, it's actually stolen from someone famous. Okay, so good. I guess everything's all set. I do have music for the interlude, and I guess that's all. Okay. Sounds good. Thanks a lot.
This is Father Dan Rehill, the National Director of Radio Maria USA. If this program has touched your heart and you would like to further the mission of Our Lady in bringing everyone to her Son, Jesus.
You're listening to Radio Maria, a Christian voice in your home, streaming live on our website at radiomaria.us, on the Radio Maria USA mobile app, on your telephone at 1-631-359-8743, and on the radio in Florida on 91.9 FM WMKL in Hammocks, Miami, in Louisiana on 580 AM KJMJ in Alexandria, 1360 AM KNIR in New Iberia, 89.7 FM KBIO in Natchitoches, and 91.1 FM KOJO in Lake Charles. In Mississippi on 88.1 FM WOLM in D'Iberville, Biloxi. In Ohio on 1600 AM WULM in Springfield, with translator W277AO 103.3 FM in Enid, Dayton, and 88.7 FM WHJM in Anna. In Pennsylvania on 88.1 FM WHHN in Hollidaysburg, Altoona. In Texas on 1250 AM KDEI in Port Arthur, and in Wisconsin at 91.3 FM WRMW in Peshtigo.
You are listening to Radio Maria, a Christian voice in your home. We now present our program, Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism, with your host, Roy Schoeman.
Hi, this is Roy Schoeman, and welcome once again to Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism, the show on Radio Maria that celebrates the Jewish roots of the Catholic faith, or seen the other way around, that celebrates the fulfillment, the full realization of Judaism and all of its promise in the Catholic Church and her sacraments. Well, it's so wonderful as a Catholic because there's almost nothing that's an ordinary day on the calendar, and today is far from being an ordinary day on the calendar. It is, in fact, the feast of Our Lady of Lourdes. So that's what today's show is going to be dedicated to. The apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary at Lourdes, and what she taught us when she told Bernadette that, when Bernadette asked for her name, when she replied, "I am the Immaculate Conception." So I will talk about what she taught us when she said that. And because the show centers on the transition from Judaism to the Catholic Church, I think I will tell a little story about Franz Werfel and Our Lady of Lourdes' involvement in converting a Jewish man, and that Jewish man's major role in popularizing knowledge of Our Lady of Lourdes and the apparitions at Lourdes. So that's my plan for today. This is a live call-in program, although that might not be obvious since I seem to talk nonstop. But anyway, it is at least in principle. And if you wish to call, the number here is 866-333-6279, which is the same as 866-333-MARY, M-A-R-Y. And I will take, as I usually do, a short musical break about halfway through the show, which is a particularly propitious time to call, because coming out of the break I will take callers. But if you want to call at some other time, that's fine too, as long as the call in the middle of my talking has to do with what I'm saying or has to do with the show. If it's a more general issue or question or comment, then please do wait for the break halfway through the show. Okay, I think most of us know the outlines of the story of the Blessed Virgin Mary's appearance at Lourdes. And I'll just very briefly go through the outline. Anyway, the apparitions took place from February 11th, 1858 until, I actually have to look at my notes for this, until June of 1858. There were 18 apparitions. The first one being February 11th, which is why today is the feast day of Our Lady of Lourdes. And she appeared to Bernadette Soubirous, later to become Saint Bernadette Soubirous, who was a illiterate, I don't want to say ignorant, but certainly an illiterate, although pious, 14-year-old girl in Lourdes, France, which is in the southwest corner of France. And she was actually so poor, her family was incredibly poor, and they actually lived in a dungeon, and the entire family, I believe there were 3 children and the 2 parents, lived in a single dungeon cell, which had very little ventilation and no way of cooking except an open fire on the floor and so forth. And she was so poor that her growth was stunted from not getting sufficient nutrition. So even as an adult, I don't think she broke 5 feet tall. So anyway, I am going to start the show by playing the Lourdes hymn. I know I said that I would take that as a musical break halfway through. I may return to it as a musical break, but I'm going to take it now in order to finish a little piece of setup here on my end that I seem to have omitted doing. So let's go to the Lourdes hymn. Now, this is actually a recording of the evening procession in Lourdes. It's a beautiful candlelit procession. There are sometimes thousands of people, even tens of thousands of people, chanting and processing around the Lourdes grotto where the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared. And this is a recording from there, so the audio quality isn't great, but I think you will recognize the tune and perhaps even recognize the spirit. And I will be back with the account of the apparition in a few minutes. Well, that was just a little taste of the procession, and I will probably go back to it halfway through, but I managed to straighten out what was unstraightened. So I will begin at the beginning. I said something about who Bernadette Soubirous was, and her family was so poor that she would go out to fetch firewood, to fetch branches that had fallen onto the ground that the family could use for heat and primarily for cooking. Actually, I think only for cooking, actually. And so she was with a friend and her sister, and they were out foraging for some firewood, and they came across a stream that ran in front of a little grotto, and the other two girls crossed the stream. Bernadette, being quite sickly, was very reluctant to cross the cold water. It's February, it's the middle of winter, but she had to, because her sister and her friend had crossed the water looking for firewood. And now I'm going to go into her own words, and that's my plan for today, is as much as possible to stick to actually the first person accounts. So this is Bernadette's description of the first apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary. I had hardly begun to take off my stocking when I heard the sound of wind as in a storm. I turned toward the meadow, and I saw that the trees were not moving at all. I had half noticed, but without paying any particular heed, that the branches and brambles were waving beside the grotto. I went on taking my stockings off and was putting one foot into the water when I heard the same sound in front of me. I looked up and saw a cluster of branches and brambles underneath the topmost opening in the grotto, tossing and swaying to and fro, though nothing else stirred all around. Behind these branches and within the opening, I immediately saw a girl in white, no bigger than myself, who greeted me with a slight bow of the head. At the same time, she stretched out her arms slightly away from her body, opening her hands as in pictures of Our Lady. Over her right arm hung a rosary. I was afraid. I stepped back. I wanted to call the two little girls. I hadn't the courage to do so. I rubbed my eyes again and again. I thought I must be mistaken. Raising my eyes again, I saw the girls smiling at me most graciously and seeming to invite me to come nearer. But I was still afraid. It was not, however, such a fear as I have had at other times, for I would have stayed there forever looking at her, whereas when you're afraid, you run away quickly. Then I thought of saying my prayers. I put my hand in my pocket. I took out the rosary I usually carry on me. I knelt down, and I tried to make the sign of the cross, but I could not lift my hand to my forehead. It fell back. The girl, meanwhile, stepped to one side and turned towards me. This time she was holding the large beads in her hand. She crossed herself as though to pray. My hand was trembling. I tried again to make the sign of the cross, and this time I could. After that, I was no longer afraid. I said my rosary. The young girl slipped the beads of hers through her fingers, but she was not moving her lips. While I was saying the rosary, I was watching as hard as I could. She was wearing a white dress reaching down to her feet, of which only the toes appeared. The dress was gathered very high at the neck by a hem from which hung a white cord. A white veil covered her head and came down over her shoulders and arms, almost to the bottom of her dress. On each foot I saw a yellow rose. The sash of the dress was blue and hung down below her knees. The chain of the rosary was yellow. The beads were white, big, and widely spaced. The girl was alive, very young, and surrounded with light. When I had finished my rosary, she bowed to me smilingly. She retired within the niche and disappeared all of a sudden. That's the end of Bernadette's account, and I'm going to go back to it in a couple of minutes, but I will continue with the description of what happened. When questioned later, Bernadette was to give further details about the young girl who had appeared. A golden cloud preceded her, she said, then the halo. The latter remained for an instant after she had disappeared. She herself was as if penetrated with a soft light, which neither hurt nor dazzled the eye. Her face was oval in shape and of an incomparable grace. Her eyes were blue, her voice, quote, "oh so sweet." Her hair scarcely showed through the veil on her forehead and was clearly visible only at the temples. So that's the description of the first apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Note that Bernadette, she was hardly a saint yet, did not name her. She simply called her a girl, and she described her. There are a lot of interesting little theological, I don't want to say wisdom, facts in this description. One is that not only did the Blessed Virgin Mary not say the Hail Marys on the rosary along with Bernadette, not mouth them, because she wasn't actually vocalizing anything at this point. Is that true? Yes, at this point she wasn't vocalizing anything, but she was not even mouthing the Hail Mary, and she wasn't even mouthing the Our Father. Now, of course, she wasn't mouthing the Hail Mary because it's not incumbent on her to praise herself. But it's interesting that she also wasn't mouthing the Our Father, because the Our Father is a prayer of sinners, right? Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And the Blessed Virgin Mary was not in that category, so she could not legitimately or meaningfully say the Our Father. However, when it came to the Glory Be, that she did pray along and even bow her head, because of course she's going to say Glory Be to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Spirit, or at least she's going to pray along with the Glory Be, even though she wasn't going to pray along with the Our Father or the Hail Mary. Now, when the other two girls rejoined Bernadette, they saw her kneeling and frozen, and they actually thought she was dead, I believe. But actually, the pushier one threw a rock at her, and that kind of got her out of the trance. And she asked whether they had seen her, and they said they didn't know what Bernadette was talking about. But Bernadette kind of told them what happened, but swore them to secrecy, which lasted just about until they got home. And then the other girls started blabbing about it. And Bernadette got in trouble for making up this story, so to speak. She didn't make up the story, but she was accused by her mother of having made up the story, and she was actually beaten. Okay, I will read this because it's such a sweet little account, and it's again a first-person account by her sister, who was one of the two little girls who was with Bernadette. So this is what happened when the two little girls came across Bernadette after the apparition ended. The person writing this is her sister, whose name was Toinette, which was a shortened form of Antoinette. I called out to her Bernadette 3 separate times. She made no reply and did not turn her head. On nearing the grotto, I twice threw a small stone at her. I hit her once on the shoulder. She didn't stir. She was white, as though she were dead. I was afraid. But Jean said to me, that was the other little girl, if she were dead, she would be lying down. All of a sudden, Bernadette came to herself once more and looked at us. I said to her, "What are you doing there?" "Nothing," she replied. "How stupid of you to pray there," I said. "Prayers are good everywhere," she replied, and then she crossed modestly over the canal. So, Bernadette always had very, very, very good answers. And that's an example of one. Simply, prayers are good everywhere. A couple of other little notes I'm going to make on Bernadette's description. One is the modesty of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Her dress was gathered high at the neck. There was no décolletage showing. There was no skin below the neck showing. Her dress was hemmed with a white cord high at the neck. It also fell entirely, not only entirely over her legs and over her ankles, but even over her feet. So only the toes were showing. And her veil covered her head and came down over her shoulders and arms almost to the bottom of the dress. So she wasn't even showing bare arms. There might be a lesson to be learned here. It's not really incumbent on me to tell women how to dress, but it's certainly worth noting how she was dressed. Now, so that's the description of the first apparition. And let me go on to a subsequent apparition, where I think it's the second one actually, where Bernadette returned to the grotto. Let me see with how many people actually. I think, I believe it was 3 days later, and she went with two other girls. I'm not sure if they were the same two other girls. I don't think so, given the way this description is written. But she brought some holy water with her because she was afraid the apparition might be satanic. And so let me go to the... So anyway, this is now Toinette. So she was obviously one of the other little girls. When we reached the grotto at the bottom, Toinette continued, she was already on her knees. She made us kneel down and take out our beads. Bernadette, when she was going to the grotto each time to see the Blessed Virgin Mary, which she didn't know was the Blessed Virgin Mary at the time, at least she wouldn't say so, but to see the beautiful girl, she was given this gift where she could run down almost the cliff, the very steep embankment behind the grotto, full speed, whereas everyone else had to pretty much crawl down on their hands and knees. So anyway, so she was at the grotto, and they were praying their rosary. Towards the end of the first decade of the rosary, Bernadette exclaimed, "Look, a bright light." Then after a moment's silence, she began again in a loud voice, imagining that her companions could see the same vision. They couldn't. So Bernadette said, "Look at her. She has her rosary slipped over her right arm. She's looking at us." Of course, the other girls didn't see anything. Then Bernadette, because she was afraid that the apparition was coming from the wrong side, so to speak, she said to the Blessed Virgin Mary, "If you come from God," she said, "then stay." And then she vigorously sprinkled holy water. And not only did she not go away, the woman, but by a smile affirmed that she came from God. Reassured, Bernadette came back and knelt among her companions. Again, after that apparition, the people there thought that Bernadette was dead, but in fact, once again, this time it was Jean who threw the stone and woke up Bernadette. And when she came back, so to speak, from the dead, her face, Jean reported, was lit up. All the girls were crying, and so was I. So they obviously saw something very special happen. Anyway, I'm just going to skip forward, perhaps to the next apparition. And I hope this is enjoyable. I'm not the most organized radio host in the world today, but I think it's worthwhile. The problem is that I have in front of me the best, I think it's the best account of the of Saint Bernadette Soubirous and the Apparition of Lourdes. It's relatively old. I think it's from the turn of the 20th century. It's by Abbé Trochu, who is a very pious priest who wrote these wonderful saint biographies, and it's 400 pages long. So I'm kind of flipping through to get the first-person accounts, and that explains my lack of organization. So a subsequent time, when one moment here. Okay, now this is she goes to the local parish priest, who is far from convinced that this is legitimate, and he was kind of giving her a hard time, and he asked her to ask Bernadette to ask the apparition, to ask the girl what her name was. And so Bernadette was being obedient, and at the subsequent apparition, Bernadette asked, "Madame, would you be so kind as to write down your name? And for the first time, the apparition spoke. So this is the first time that Bernadette heard the voice of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And the way that Bernadette described the voice of the Blessed Virgin Mary, when the priest asked her if she had heard her voice, Bernadette said, "Oh yes." The priest asked whether Bernadette had heard the apparition's voice distinctly. Bernadette's answer was, "Oh yes, most clearly. Only it seems to me the sound of her voice reaches me here." And while she was saying this, she placed her hand on her breast. So the voice went straight into her heart. Now, if you've heard my witness testimony, you know that when I describe hearing the Blessed Virgin Mary's voice, I won't go into details now. The way I usually describe it is it went straight through me. It went straight through me. This incredibly beautiful voice went straight through me, lifting me up into a state of pure joy. And so when Bernadette says, "Yes, only it seems to me the sound of her voice reached her here in her heart," I think I know what she's talking about. So anyway, continuing, the apparition did speak at this time. She spoke in the local dialect, which is very interesting. She didn't speak in proper French. She spoke in the dialect that Bernadette understood. And then Bernadette asked, remember what Bernadette had said was, "Madame, would you be so kind as to write down your name?" And then she began to laugh. The Blessed Virgin Mary began to laugh. She smiled and then she laughed and said, "There's no need to write down what I have to say." And it turns out that Bernadette then seems to have remembered supernaturally, word for word, everything the Blessed Virgin Mary said. Then the Blessed Virgin Mary continues speaking to Bernadette after Bernadette said the rosary, and said in that very beautiful, sweet voice, "Will you do me the favor of coming here for a fortnight?" And it's interesting to some observers that the Blessed Virgin Mary spoke in an extremely respectful vocabulary to Bernadette. In other words, she didn't speak like adults were used to speaking to illiterate peasant children in that part of the world, but she spoke, you could say, as to an equal, in a very, very polite grammar and vocabulary. So that's also, to me, it's worth noting that the Blessed Virgin Mary does, in some sense, consider us, I think, as equals. I mean, she does definitely does not lord it over us, but she probably has a deeper respect for us as individuals than we have for ourselves, frankly. Anyway, so the Blessed Virgin Mary said, "Will you do me the favor of coming here for a fortnight?" And Bernadette, who is always very obedient, said, "After asking permission from my parents, I will come." So she wasn't going to make a promise that she wasn't in a position to keep, and she wasn't going to openly disobey her parents. So anyway, at that point, the Blessed Virgin Mary said something very interesting to Bernadette. Not that anything she said wasn't interesting. She said, quote, "I do not promise to make you happy in this world, but in the next." That is really the key to our happiness, is that the Blessed Virgin Mary never promised to make us happy in this world. This world is where we carry our cross. She does promise to make us happy in the next world for all eternity if we play our cards right. And then when she had said that, this is Bernadette's account now, when she had said that, she rose toward the roof, that is the roof of the little grotto where she was standing, and disappeared. And I think that's a good place to take the halfway through break. So you've been listening to Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism on Radio Maria with me, your host, Roy Schoeman. And I'll be back in a couple of minutes. I'll play the Lourdes hymn again, a little more, and then I will rejoin you. And in the meantime, if you wish to call in with a question or a comment, the number here is 866-333-6279 or 866-333-MARY, M-A-R-Y. And if you use Skype, it's on.air.rm, which stands for Radio Maria, and then Skype. And so with that, let me bring up the music, and I will be back in a few minutes. And again, the number here is 866-333-6279 if you wish to call in. Well, I'm back, and if I'm not mistaken, I will double check, but I believe that we do not have any callers. So I will go back to my account of the apparitions at Lourdes. I have talked for much longer than an hour on Lourdes and the apparitions at Lourdes, so I'm not going to do justice to every aspect of them, including the medical miracles, except for the ones that were in the very early days, if I get to that. And there's so many other aspects of this. But I do want to go at least into the next couple of apparitions, because there's so much of the Blessed Virgin Mary taught us through Bernadette. So this is now an account by an eyewitness, Dr. Dozu, a doctor from the town of Lourdes, who, I'm telescoping a number of different. She appeared 18 times, right? So I'm telescoping at this point, the early apparitions. The first two, there were only Bernadette's two friends. By the fourth appearance, there were 8 people, including Bernadette's mother and 2 of her aunts. By the fifth appearance, 30 people were present. By the sixth appearance, over 100 people were present, then 150, then 250 at the 8th appearance, and so forth and so on. 800 at the 10th appearance, over 1,000 at the 11th, then 1,500, and so forth. So this one that I'm recounting now is one where there were a number of people present. I'm not sure whether it's the one with 30 people or so, but I suspect it was. And one of them was a town doctor, Dr. Dozu, and he gives his account. As soon as she was in front of the grotto, that's Bernadette, Bernadette knelt down, took her rosary out of her pocket, and began to pray, telling her beads. Soon her face underwent a transformation noticed by everyone near her, and showing that she was in touch with the apparition. While her beads were moving through her right hand, she held in the other a lighted candle which was often blown out by the very strong breeze, but each time she handed it to the person nearest her to be immediately relit. Then the doctor picked up her arm to see if there were any signs of, a nervous fit, or because that's what people were accusing Bernadette of what was going on, because they didn't want to believe her. So he holds her arm, he feels her pulse, and so forth, and she seems completely normal. And then the doctor continues, after I had let go of her arm, Bernadette advanced a short distance toward the top of the grotto. Soon I saw her face, which up to now had expressed the most perfect happiness, grow sad. 2 tears fell from her eyes and rolled down her cheeks. When the mysterious being had disappeared and Bernadette had finished her prayers, the doctor could not refrain from asking Bernadette the reason for these tears after such happy smiles. Bernadette replied the following, quote, "The lady took her eyes off me for a moment and gazed into the distance over my head. Then, looking at me again, as I had asked her what was making her sad, she said to me, 'Pray to God for sinners.' I was quickly reassured by the expression of kindness and serenity I saw once more on her face, and she straightway disappeared." So, in the middle of this apparition, so to speak, the Blessed Virgin Mary stopped looking at Bernadette, looked off into the distance, and then looked very, very, very sad, so sad that Bernadette started crying. And when Bernadette asked her what the problem was, what was making her sad, her reply was, "Pray to God for sinners." So one can imagine when the Blessed Virgin Mary was looking off into the distance, she was seeing souls being lost, whether she was seeing souls in a state of serious sin or whether she was seeing souls in hell, we don't know. But she was seeing souls, being lost, and the only thing she said in reply to Bernadette's question was, "Pray to God for sinners." So, and the next apparition I'll read, if I can find it quickly enough, is going to be where the Blessed Virgin Mary asks Bernadette to do penance. Again, we're coming into Lent. Ash Wednesday is about a week and a half off. Lent is the period for penance, 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 making reparation for sins and praying for the souls of poor sinners so that they are not lost. This message we don't associate. I see I have a caller, and I'll take the call in a moment. We associate the vision of hell with Fatima, and the need to pray for this conversion of sinners with Fatima. With Lourdes, the tendency is to associate it more with the Blessed Virgin Mary's concern for us and all of the miraculous healings and how much she wants to help us. But the biggest way she can possibly help us or help humanity is by getting more of us to pray more for poor sinners so that they can convert. And so that is really, really, really a central message of Lourdes, which sometimes gets overlooked. But with that, I see we have a caller. If you could give us your name and where you're calling from, please.
Hi, this is Molly again. I'm calling from Virginia.
Hi, did you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I guess I think a little of both. So just as you were talking, I was trying to compare Fatima and Lourdes, and to just try to figure out the specific purpose of Mary when she did appear at Lourdes, as opposed to Fatima, and why she appeared at two different times. And of course, there's the very strong connection between repentance and healing itself, because they're intricately joined together. But my other question is, did Mary reveal that she was the Immaculate Conception at Lourdes, or am I getting that confused?
No,
and
it
how
was
does
at
that
Lourdes.
tie into the...
It was at Lourdes. I mean, I don't know. I hope I get to it. It's not guaranteed. But it was at Lourdes that when the church authorities insisted that he kept asking her to find out, asking Bernadette to find out the lady's name, to tell her name, she finally answered, the Blessed Virgin Mary finally answered, I am the Immaculate Conception. And that was at Lourdes.
Okay, so then my question is, how does the Immaculate Conception, the idea of that itself, tie in with penance and healing and what's going to happen, politically speaking, in this world, I guess?
Okay.
Because
thank you for the question. I'll do my best. It may or may not be good enough.
Okay.
She did not talk about what's going to happen in this world at Lourdes. So it wasn't like Fatima, where she says, "Oh boy, mankind's in a lot of trouble if they don't change their ways." So that's not really part of it. As to why she calls herself the Immaculate Conception, first of all, that's who she is. That's a good reason. That is the biggest thing about her, is that she's the Immaculate Conception. That's one reason she called herself the Immaculate Conception. She's the only... I mean, look, you can say, I can call my name Roy, right? Someone says, what's your name? I can say Roy. But there are, thousands of other Roys out there. If I want to be more specific, I might say Roy Showman, but there might be one or two other Roy Showmans. So I might add my middle name, and that's like I'm the only one, right? So if the Blessed Virgin Mary, whatever she said, she's the only Immaculate Conception, period, of any human being. So it's a pretty good, unique identifier. But another reason, which St. Maximilian Kolbe pointed out, which I think is really neat, is that the Holy Spirit is the uncreated Immaculate Conception. The Holy Spirit proceeds from the love between the Father and the Son. And the Blessed Virgin Mary is the spouse of the Holy Spirit. And just as an earthly wife takes the name of her husband, the Blessed Virgin Mary identified herself essentially as the spouse of the uncreated Holy Spirit, the uncreated Immaculate Conception, which is the Holy Spirit. And you don't get much more important than being the spouse of God, right? So it's also an incredibly beautiful title for her to have, and it's her ultimate title. And the final reason, which is probably a little bit more mundane and more accurate, is that this was 3 years after the dogma of the Immaculate Conception was first pronounced. So, if I'm not mistaken, it was Pius IX. I could be mistaken by that, but I don't think so. I think it was Pius IX. But in any case, the Pope had just issued a bull a couple of years earlier, officially confirming the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception and that the Blessed Virgin Mary was conceived without original sin. So this was the Blessed Virgin Mary ratifying that dogma, so to speak, with her own words, out of her own mouth. Now, the Marian dogmas, the dogmas that refer to the privileges of the Blessed Virgin Mary and her role in salvation, have an incredibly important effect on the salvation of all of mankind, frankly. That's why a lot of people, there's been a lot of effort over the last 20 years or so to have formally proclaimed what's referred to as the fifth Marian dogma, which is that the Blessed Virgin Mary is the mediatrix of all graces and the co-redemptrix. And the people who want to see the fifth Marian dogma dogmatically proclaimed are convinced that it'll basically change the course of world history, that basically it will open up a floodgate of additional graces through the Blessed Virgin Mary somehow in the economy of salvation, as the pronouncement of the Immaculate Conception was incredibly important to salvation history. So I'm getting a little bit off topic, but it's a really good topic. So thank you for your call. I'm going to have to go back to the apparition now, but thanks for bringing up those issues. And anyway, the phone line's still open, so if somebody wishes to call. I'm trying to skip forward to the penance apparition. Here it is. This is now February 27th, and there were 400 to 500 people there. And I'll just go into the account. Even before finishing the first decade of her rosary, Bernadette strained forward with a gentle movement of her whole body, as though she had caught sight of an object which enraptured her. Her eyes remained wide open, neither dilated nor blinking, and then there came a lovely smile and graceful bows which she made without lowering her eyes. Skipping forward a little bit. She knelt down a little way from the arch. That's the arch in which the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared. Those who accompanied her there saw her grow sad again. Bernadette grow sad again, like that other time. What was the lady speaking to her about? In view of what was to follow, we must conclude that she unfolded before the eyes of her pure little confidante the hideous picture of the sins of mankind and the urgency of expiation. This is again sort of like Fatima. With tears in her eyes, Bernadette stood up again, clasping her rosary in her hands and seeming to want to address the crowd. In fact, the people nearest her could hear her voice coming from the depths of her ecstasy. With a gasp, she repeated the word, penance, penance, penance. The word spread from mouth to mouth throughout the crowd. Bernadette had delivered her first message. So that's kind of also the message of Fatima, as well as the message of Lourdes, is penance, penance, penance. The need to do penance, the need to pray for the conversion of sinners. And again, we're coming up on Lent, so this is turning into a good Lenten program, although usually I think of the Apparition of Lourdes as a very happy occasion. Now, I think at the next apparition, I will again start with an eyewitness account. The child, this is the I know who's giving this account, but it doesn't matter. But it's a townswoman who actually had been quite hostile to Bernadette's apparitions. She was very critical and cynical, but obviously that doesn't last forever. So this is what she wrote. The child had not recited a decade of her beads when all of a sudden she set off on her knees and began to clamber in this way up the slope that led to the interior of the grotto. When she reached the back of the grotto, Bernadette turned about and came back still on her knees down the same slope. I witnessed there a tour de force, and I ought to have marveled more at the ease of the child's movement in such a posture on steeply sloping ground that was very uneven and strewn with stones which jutted out sharply here and there. Now, this is an act of penance. Think about it. Bernadette is scrambling on her knees up a steep slope covered with sharp stones, and then back again. And obviously, the Blessed Virgin Mary had requested her to do that as a penance. And then Bernadette later explains, and then this is actually the next step in the penance. The lady said to me, "Go and drink at the spring and wash yourself in it." Not seeing any spring, I was going to drink from the river. She told me that it was not there. She pointed with her finger to the place of the spring. I went there. I saw merely a bit of dirty water. I put my hand in it, but I could not get hold of any. I scratched, and a little bit of water came, but muddy. 3 times I drew it away. The 4th time I was able to drink some. That is the miracle of the origin of the Lourdes water. That spring that sprang up there that she's describing as just a little muddy puddle became the Lourdes water, which produces, I think it is 2,000 gallons, 3,000 gallons a day. Anyway, there was not at this date any visible spring in the grotto there. No, nothing more than an intermittent ooze or condensation. So here's the, put yourself kind of in this situation, or rather imagine the situation. Already people are saying Bernadette is a lunatic, right? She scrambles up the steep slope on her knees. Of course, nobody sees Mary, so they, are just taking Bernadette's word for it in a sense. She's scrambling up on her knees. She's scrambling down on her knees. Then she goes on her hands and, on her all fours, on her knees and on her hands, and starts scratching at a muddy puddle and trying to scoop up a handful of water in order to drink. She finally gets enough to drink. Her face is full of mud. She's just drunk this muddy water. Then she is told by the Blessed Virgin Mary to eat some of this weed that's growing there. So then she breaks off some of this weed and starts chewing it. Just think of how this made her seem absolutely stark raving mad and the object of contempt. And everyone began to say, this is one of the eyewitnesses saying, everyone began to say she's out of her mind. So not only was the penance, the pain of scrambling up on her knees, the disgustingness of drinking, first scratching in the mud and then drinking a handful of muddy water, and then eating these horribly bitter weeds while everyone is mocking you and laughing at you and thinking that you're stark raving mad. And this is a village, right? I don't know how many people lived in Lourdes, 1,000 people in those days. For the rest of her life, so to speak, she is going to be the laughingstock mad woman, as far as she knows. But of course, she does it without any hesitation. So I'm saying this because the penance that she did is not only a physical penance, but is inviting scorn and being despised and being mocked. And of course, that is to be encouraged also as a penance, so to speak, because when you think of Jesus and his passion, certainly the contempt with which he think of the Stations of the Cross, or think of the sorrowful mysteries. Okay, he's crowned with thorns, he's spit at, he's covered with spittle, he's taken for a clown, he's mocked. He's put on this filthy scarlet robe to make fun of him claiming to be a king and so forth. The humiliation, the scorn, the being despised was definitely part of his way of the cross, and is not surprising that when you are given a wonderful way of the cross, it includes that that penance, so to speak, of being held in contempt like Jesus was held in contempt. So anyway, at the end of this apparition, Bernadette was certainly held in contempt. So I think that's probably as far as I can go there. And maybe I'll just finish by reading the account of a very early. No, I said I would give the Franz Werfel story. I only have 2 minutes or so. Okay, here's the story. Franz Werfel was an absolutely leading journalist in Europe at the time of the Holocaust, at the beginning of Hitler, actually. Think of it like the number one New York Times journalist in Austria and Germany, or the local version of that. He was Jewish. He wrote very aggressively against the rise of Hitler. He was, I believe, number one on Hitler's assassination list, and he was chased all over Europe, by Hitler's goons who were trying to kill him. He's trying to escape to the United States. He ends up in Lourdes. He's, of course, Jewish. And he's stuck in Lourdes, and he has to get over the Pyrenees into Spain in order to cross over to the United States, get a boat to the United States. And he's stuck in Lourdes, and he can't get over the Pyrenees. And of course, he knows what's going on in Lourdes, even though he's Jewish. So he makes a vow to the Our Lady of Lourdes that if she helps him escape and get to freedom in the United States, he will write her song. He'll write a song of praise to her. And he does have a semi-miraculous escape. He does make it over the Pyrenees and not get caught, and makes it to the United States. And he writes a book which became the Song of Bernadette. If you know that book, it's an excellent account, which was then made into a movie. He actually wrote the screenplay called Song of Bernadette, which is probably the best movie about the Blessed Virgin Mary's apparition at Lourdes. And it was written by this Jewish man in fulfillment of a vow to Our Lady of Lourdes at Lourdes when he was trapped there and about to be assassinated. So that is the Jewish connection to Our Lady of Lourdes. She saved this Jewish man, and in return, he made her famous. Lourdes was not well known in the United States in those days. We're talking about maybe the mid-40s, early 40s. And it was really the Song of Bernadette and Franz Werfel's book and movie that made Lourdes at least world famous, so to speak, in the United States. So with that, I've reached the end of my time. I want to thank you for listening. And you've been listening to Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism, with me, your host, Roy Schoeman, on Radio Maria. And I will go out with the Lourdes hymn, and with my prayer, so to speak, that the Lourdes hymn will somehow spiritually kind of bring us to Lourdes, bring us into the atmosphere of Lourdes, and bring us into the presence of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So with that, goodbye. And don't forget, we're whatever it is, 11, 12 days away from Ash Wednesday. Don't let it come as a surprise. Start preparing now for how you're going to spend your Lent. And with that, I hope you join us again next week, same time, same place. Bye for now. Oops. Wow, that's wrong. Oh.
Imagine that you just tuned into Radio Maria and heard nothing. No Beyond the Veil with Father Thomas Loya. No Angelus. No Holy Rosary with various bishops. No Beyond Fatima with Katie Moran. And so many...
Okay, now I think all you hear is me rather than that Jewish music. Anyway, thank you guys, for those of you on the live stream, for watching. And I'm afraid I wasn't even able to keep up with the chat stream or even glance at it because I was too busy, trying to find the next passage in the book that I wanted to read and so forth. I do have a probably a 2-hour video on Lourdes. I think I have two actually. I think I actually have two full videos, so it's probably like 2.5 to 2 hour videos. One of them is entirely on the medical miracles at Lourdes. I know that one of you asked me if I would talk about that, but I hadn't prepared, believe it or not. Whatever it looks like, I actually do prepare these shows, but I never, wrong way. I never prepare them enough. So I have a whole video on the medical miracles at Lourdes, and I have, I think, a whole video on Franz Werfel, in a sense. It's a very interesting story. If any of you know who Mahler is, he's my favorite composer. He was also a Jewish convert, Gustav Mahler. Mahler's wife, Alma Mahler, was not a paragon of virtue. She's famous for all of the men she ran off with in her life, but she actually ended up running off with and marrying Franz Werfel, and she was actually with him at Lourdes. So there's this tremendous connection between Mahler and Werfel, and also Berg, who was another composer, and also Walter Gropius, who was the biggest architect of the middle of the 20th century in Germany. I mean, anywhere actually, but he was in Germany, who also lived with Alma Mahler at one point, and so forth and so on. It's a very entertaining story, and I have a whole show on that. Let me see what the chat stream said, if anything. Or I shouldn't say if anything, it's wonderful stuff, but it's not necessarily something that I should. Oh, here's a little, because you guys like personal stories. Well, no, I'm not gonna go there. But I had a couple of miracles connected with Lourdes. Some people, this is Moises. Moises always hits the target. Some people said Lourdes is a thank you from heaven for the definition of the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, which had been declared, he says 4 years earlier. It's really, I believe, closer to 3 years earlier. I think it was late 1854. And the apparition was very early, 1858. I just want to be a pedant there because I had heard, I knew it was 1854 and 1858, but I also read that it was about 3 years, so I think that's the reconciliation. Pius IX, yeah, that was, I'm pretty sure. So anyway, I think that's about all. I have a great devotion to Saint Bernadette. I got a miraculous healing. I think I mentioned this, definitely an instantaneous miraculous healing at the tomb of the incorrupt body of Saint Bernadette. I'll tell that story because it's not terribly personal. But I was staying at the convent in Nevers, France, where Saint Bernadette's body is. It's where Saint Bernadette lived out her life, actually, in the convent. And I think I was the only, may not have been the only pilgrim staying in the convent. There might have been 3 others, 4 others, 5 others. I have a memory of 2 old ladies, and I have a memory of a wonderful young priest. But I was essentially alone because it used to have like 200 nuns there, and now they had like 5 pilgrims. But if you stay there, you can go in the chapel when the convent is locked up, essentially, when all the tourists have left and everyone has left. There's an interior staircase into the chapel where Bernadette's tomb is. So I went down there early one morning. It was, of course, completely empty. And at the time, both my knees were really bad. I had blown out both knees. I couldn't bend my knees more than 90 degrees. I couldn't walk more than a few minutes without pain. I couldn't climb stairs if they were more than about so high, if you know what I mean, the risers. I couldn't scramble over rocks. I couldn't sit cross-legged. My knees were in really bad shape. I had damaged them, a combination of downhill skiing, bump skiing actually, and ballet. I had stretched out the ligaments that held the kneecaps in place. So I'm at Lourdes. I'm at Nevers, and I'm staying there, and I go down into the chapel. And in those days, my passions were dancing ballet and downhill skiing. But I couldn't do either anyway because my knees were so bad. So anyway, I go down into the chapel and I pray and I say, Lord, if there's anything standing in the way of me going to the next stage with you, let me know and I'll give it up. And I thought I was answered ballet and downhill skiing. And so I said, okay, if you don't want me to, I will never again take another ballet class and I will never again go downhill skiing. And then I went up to the tomb of Bernadette. She's in a glass coffin. She's totally incorrupt. She's incredibly beautiful. That's in the show on Lourdes too, on my video that I did. Anyway, so I went up to her glass tomb, all alone, just me and her. And I went down on my knees, and I heard a crack in each of my knees, like if you crack knuckles. I can't do it, but you know that sound when people crack their knuckles. I heard that. I felt it in both knees, and I got up, and my knees were fine. And they've been fine ever since, with the exception of if I start thinking, well, maybe it'll be okay to go skiing again, then my knees start hurting really bad. Sometimes, before I learned not to start fantasizing about skiing, there was at least one time when I had to actually take to bed because my knees hurt so much. But with that exception, my knees have been fine. So that's my St. Bernadette miracle story. So with that, I better go. So, no, it's not, Antonia, it's not, yeah, I was bump skiing. I was awfully good. I actually had a minor accident, not really an accident, but I did have a concussion because I was skiing with a friend who was a gold medalist, in a World Cup gold medalist in bump skiing. And I was trying to compete with him, so to speak, just informally. And boy, was I out of my league. And I got a concussion, but I was good enough to think I could compete with this gold medalist World Cup bump skier. So anyway, no, it was a sin for me. I'm not going to even say it was a sin. I had to give it up because I lived for skiing. It was a false god for me. It's not that skiing is a sin. John Paul II was very fond of skiing. But if NFL football is more important to you than God, then watching NFL football is a sin. If embroidering doilies is more important to you than God, then embroidering doilies is a sin. So it's in that light that I had to give up skiing. If you don't know what bump skiing is, it's going over bumps. It's going over moguls. It's going over. What happens is if a lot of people ski, then the snow gets worn away in this pattern of like polka dots of bumps. They can be quite high. They can be like 5 or 6 feet high with little valleys in between. A nonstop, just continual, like white caps. When the ocean is really stirred up. And it's really, really, really neat to ski down them, over them, timed so that the lift into the air you get from one bump sets you up for the next bump. And of course, at each bump, you're turning. So you're actually doing this weaving, jumping, turning, dictated by the rhythm of the bumps. Anyway. Mogul skiing, yeah, it's mogul skiing. Also, by the way, the other reason skiing skiing was really bad for me, you can see it, you can probably hear it in my voice, is I was very proud. I was very proud. I mean, you know, in other words, it's really bad for your ego to be a really good skier. You know, because it's like, I don't know how to put it, but you get a really swelled head and you get really arrogant and everything. I certainly did. I mean, yeah, I mean, I really, really, really was on an ego trip from it. So anyway, that's it. I probably, any merit I got from doing that show, I just lost by getting swelled up again about my skiing prowess, my former skiing prowess. So anyway, I better go. Goodbye, 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 goodbye. I'll go back to the opening screen. Let me see if I can pull up. Oh, I don't even know where I am. Is this me? Yes, this is me. So, okay. Copy, open, paste. I'll make that small. And, oh, you know what? I'll go to the music that I had before the show. I don't know if any of you were here. It's Tota Pulchra es Maria. It's the Harpa Dei again. So it's much nicer music. So I'll bring that up.
Tota pulchra es Maria, tota pulchra es Maria, et macula originalis, non est in te. Et macula originalis, non est in te, tu gloria Jerusalem, tu laetitia Israel, tu honorificentia populi nostri, tu advocata peccatorum, O Maria, Virgo prudentissima, Mater clementissima, ora pro nobis, intercede pro nobis, ad Dominum Iesum Christum. Tota pulchra es Maria, tota pulchra es Maria, et macula originalis, non est in te. Et macula originalis, non est in te, tu gloria Jerusalem, tu laetitia Israel, tu honorificentia populi nostri, tu advocata peccatorum, O Maria, Tota pulcra es Maria, tota pulcra es Maria.